365 Days of Horsemanship, day 240. So yeah, pretty proud of myself for coming today. I was out late last night in London, and I had a 12-hour shift today, and I was really anticipating that I was going to be exhausted. And so in anticipation of that, I had a coffee and a cup of tea today, and that's quite a lot of caffeine for me, and so I'm feeling quite comfortably awake at the moment. And I'm sure I'll sleep really well later and catch up on that. Tomorrow I'll be tired, but today it's really nice because I was really anticipating I wasn't going to be able to come today, and I had already sort of said to myself in advance, like, you know what, you're doing this 12-hour shift, you're probably going to be knackered, it's okay if you don't go today. You did overdo it yesterday. I was hanging out with friends, and I wouldn't change that. Like, I haven't seen them in ages, and it was really lovely to see them. And actually, I finished work and I saw my fiance on the way out of work, and I said, I'm not really sure, like, maybe I will go. And he was like, yeah, go. And again, I'm really glad I did. And I had a really interesting and fortuitous session with both horses. I actually called Lawrence down and fed him, which interestingly afterwards, I thought about it. And I thought, because when I called him, the whole herd came. And it's just not great vibes, I think, for the rest of them when he's being fed and they're not being fed. I think the pros of it are that the whole herd comes down, because what I did was I fed him, put him in his pen, and then I went to go see Mia while he was eating, and then I came back and had a little session with him afterwards. And so I think that's good, to have the herd around so that he's not on his own in the dark in the pen. However, I'm just not sure that it's very good for the herd dynamics for him to be having this food in front of everybody that no one else can have, because food envy and food jealousy is a really difficult problem, because it really only exists in domesticated horses. Like, in the wild, you don't really see that in the same way, because like if a herd runs out of food, they just move. Like, it's a whole herd decision. There is no situations where there's like a restricted amount of food available and it runs out and then more appears. Like, there's never that situation. So I don't love the whole food thing generally, and honestly I've been really enjoying the luxury of not being involved with food at all, because I just find it really complicates everything. But I've had to kind of put it aside for the greater good, which is ultimately it's the winter, and it would be better if he had 3 feeds on the days when I'm here at a time when I can give him a 3rd feed. And actually his physical health needs to come above that conversation. He's done really well this year, to the point where I really am only just starting to see him drop now. And I'm thinking, I probably should pick up the feeds. And, and it's okay. The problem that I have with it is it's just such a strong pull. There's such an expectation. And I just feel like it really just interrupts the relationship, because now I've become somebody who can deliver a very high value, scarce food. And that makes me desirable for extrinsic reasons, and I'm trying to have really intrinsic conversations, and so that's just really difficult. But to be honest with you, I am spoiled. 90% of horse owners, I don't know the percentage, but the majority of horse owners feed their own horses, are involved in that to some degree. And so I'm quite fortunate that I don't have to be involved in that for the large part. And, maybe it's just about, this time of year I am involved in that, and that's okay. The difficulty is being consistent, because I'm not going to be able to feed him every time I'm here, because sometimes he'll have just been fed, or it's the wrong time of day because he'll be about to be fed. And so it's quite tricky, because I don't want to set it up as being too regular and consistent that he creates an expectation in himself. But I also I want it to be random. I want it to be random enough that it's not concerning for him. Like, I don't want it to be so random that he's like always wondering if or when it's going to happen. So I kind of want it to be like a bit routine, but then I also don't want it to be routine, because I don't want him to like like build any of those associations. So it's quite challenging, but I think I'm just going to see how it goes. I definitely think at this point, I have the opportunity to feed him first, and I think that's really good. I think it's definitely takes away this idea that I'm withholding the food in order to get the session. The other option, other than calling him, would be to go and get him and halter him and bring him down for his food, which would stop the other horses from coming down, which is good. And I think in the past, I've actually done that and then fed him in the field rather than in the pen, and then he's been able to go back up to the herd whenever he's finished, which is good unless the herd notices and then they come down and steal his food. And there's also just the difficulty in that of then having to then halter him and bring him down, and he's also obviously on his own. So it's like, it means that I'm then having this sort of like insistent conversation with him with a good outcome, but it's also an outcome that's based on food. So it's a tricky conversation. It's a tricky problem. I feel like there's a lot of different ways I could manage it. And for now, I'm just going to follow my feel, try to be a bit consistent. And yeah, just really see where I go from there with it, really. But it was really nice. Like, you know, I brought him up, and I went to see Mia and actually was reminded how much she likes the touching distance. There were way more focus changes at the touching distance with her today, and I was able to be in flow with her for a lot more breaths, which was really nice. It was basically pretty much just flowing with her today. Towards the end, I started offering her the halter, and just like literally her looking at the halter, and then I would go back to a nice spot that I'd been in before. And yeah, eventually she did a nice little like blowout, and so I left there. I was a bit distracted with her, I have to admit. There was a weird sound that I'd never heard before. And obviously it's like dark here, and it sounded like someone was like, I don't know, like stacking plastic boxes or something, but it was so loud. And I was like, started to get a bit worried that like maybe someone was like caught in their rug or something. Like it was like the kind of sound where it was like something flapping or something like that. So I really wanted to go and check the other horses. So I came across the field to check the other herd. I was definitely a bit distracted while I was with Mia, but it was sort of nice. Like I definitely do think that in some ways she's like a young horse where she requires like a lot of movement. Like she sort of like forces you to keep like checking stuff out all the time. And I think it was nice in a sense for her that I was preoccupied with this sound, because I think potentially she felt like then she didn't have to be, which was good. So yeah, so all things considered, it was quite good. I was happy with where I left it. I came back to Lawrence and had a lovely little conversation where I was just moving around in different places. Found that me putting my hand over his back sort of like immediately sort of made him like a bit more aware, sort of brought the energy up. And I was able to sort of play around with that, moving from like places that were more like sort of exciting or like brought the stress up, and then moving back down to places that were more comfortable quite nicely. And then he started looking for the nose touch, and so at that point I rewarded him with just peace and flow in a favorite spot by his left shoulder. And it was good, because I definitely have felt this shift recently where he's starting to use the nose touch in situations where he's not necessarily asking to be scratched, and he's starting to use it as the question, can you make this easier for me? Which is really good, because that was something that took me a while to really like get my head around. We then had a nice little walk together over this really like sort of treacherous, uneven ground, and he was almost like pushing me from behind, like to lead him, to show him the way to go. And I think he was a bit frustrated. I don't know if I'm projecting, but it felt like he was a bit frustrated that he'd like asked me to help him and to show him like the best way to go, and then that way wasn't really any better than all the other ways. But it wasn't going to be. Like, you know, the reason I was struggling less than him is because I was making a conscious effort to keep my weight like in my heels and not like fall, because you know when you're walking, like you fall into each step. Like you can't do that when the ground is that uneven, because you're putting too much weight through an unstable foot that hasn't hit the ground yet. So you have to like keep your weight back, and kind of like, you know, sort of lead with a leg that doesn't have any weight on it. Put the leg down before you transfer your weight. And that's definitely something that I think, you know, I was thinking about it while I was doing it and thinking, wow, like this is actually something that would be really good if he was better at, and I really would like him to feel better about that, about using his body and and shifting his weight from like back to front. And, you know, maybe that's something that I work on, I guess. I also had the halter with me, and I was able to show him the halter a couple of times and get him to touch it with his nose, which was good. Yeah, and then he had a nice little moment of being distracted by the herd. And I started leaving, and he did like a blowout, which was really nice. So yeah, so it was a really nice session, all things considered, and I'm really happy that I came. And yeah, I'm looking forward to tomorrow.